Good evening. Hello! This is Brandy Rose Smith, live from the Forbidden Library. It's Sunday story time. But you know what it also is? The 2nd of Spooky Month. Hi! How you doing? It is the 2nd of Spooky Month, and now I have a costume. I am the devil in the details. Yes. What I am up to? What I'm up to is I'm going to read more Exordium from chapter 12, because last time my internet died. And I didn't get to read all of chapter 12, I only got about halfway through, which is sad. Yeah, convenient for you, actually, because that's about where you dropped off. So we're pretty much picking up where you left off. But, a quick recap for prosperity, I suppose. Exordium, chapter 1, started with someone going into something called the Forbidden Ruins. Because of desperation, they needed money, and they wanted to go get something brain, come on. Brady is loading. I'm sorry, Brady's been a bit fuzzy today. Yeah, I'm glad you could come too. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Okay, so, yeah. He went in, to go get something to sell because he needed money to feed his family and shit. But then, he found a magic thing and got shafted by a Dragia and didn't come out again. So, the next chapter, we were introduced to our main character, Nox, who is also a poor and desperate person who needs money not only to feed himself, but to help his ailing mother, who may not last much longer. So, he goes to find work, but there's really not a lot of work to be found. And he overhears a adventuring party saying they're going to try the Forbidden Dungeon. Forbidden Ruins, not dungeon. It is kind of a dungeon. And decides to tag along with them, because at least if he's going to be suicidal, he may as well be suicidal with people. So, they venture into the ruins, and he hears something that calls to him. Where he finds the strange magical item that the other guy did, and the Draugia come after them, just like they did the other guy, and they seem attracted to the magical item. So he tries to throw it away, but Mr. MacGuffin says no, and it's stuck to his hand, it's stuck to his body. So, what he does is he separates from the other party members because the Draugia are only going to go after him. But the Draugia end up pushing him down this huge ravine where he gets caught in spider webs. Luckily, said spider does not turn up. He cuts himself out of the webs, falls to the bottom of the ravine, but luckily it was like that bit in... Oh, Don't Talk About Bruno movie, you know what I'm on about, where she falls and it's not actually that far, so he was actually kind of okay. Then he walks for a long time. He doesn't know if he's going to get out because he's at the bottom of a ravine in a very strange ruin until he finds some stairs. Those stairs are covered in more webs. And that is about where we got to last time, where he goes up those, gets caught by the spiders, but then the magical item does magical things and blows up all the spiders. And they're all dead, and that's great. And now he's okay, but there's a ball of light that seems to be turning into some kind of strange creature. And that's about where we're up to in chapter 12. That is a summary of the whole book so far. Let's get into it. Because I need to read. I want to know. I want to know about this fluffy boy. It took Nox a few moments for his eyes to adjust, and a few more to locate his spear that was partially trapped under one of the dead spiders. Yuck. Oh, wait, I forgot something. Something about my setup that I forgot. There we go. Yeah. Now I know what buttons to press my expressions. Woo! Cradling his freshly broken arm, he worked the spear free. The crystal remained attached to the spear, thankfully undamaged. Using it to light his way, He stumbled back over to where the strange creature had formed in front of him. The glow caught a black shape on the ground, and Nox kneeled down beside it, holding out the crystal. At first, the shadows were too deep to make out much, but as he looked over, he realized it was a fox. 1,000 questions spilled into his mind, all at once. Where was the cylinder? Had the trio of eyes in his dreams been real? Had everything he just witnessed been a hallucination from the spider venom? Why was there now a ring on his finger? How was he going to sling his broken arm? On and on they flowed through his mind like a raging river. However, one urge pushed through. The one that I clipped for my TikTok. Nox had never seen a fox in person before. Only pelts displayed by vendors, and he always admired how soft they were. The fox in front of him was bigger than he anticipated, and he'd never seen a black one before. He put his spear on the ground, reaching out a hand to pet the creature in front of him, wondering if it was real or just a figment of his imagination. A thought stopped him at the last second and he recoiled. This was magic. There was no doubt about it. He'd been so desperate to live that he'd resorted to magic, and that would surely bring about his ultimate demise. Sure, he could claim ignorance, but that wouldn't stop the Holy Knights from hunting him to the end of Licorice. They had ways of finding people who messed with the arcane arts. He'd survived for the moment, but if he somehow miraculously made it out of the ruins, he'd be a dead man in less than a month. Especially if Captain Ragvir had his men had anything to do with it. The creature in front of him began to stir, pulling him from his worries. Nox snatched up his spear and levelled it at the fox with his one good hand, preparing for an attack. He held his breath, watching the small body begin to shift. It uncurled and stretched out its front paws, toe beans. It doesn't say beans, but I feel the need to add it. Ah, yeah, I wrote books. 1 second. We're gonna change things just so I can tell you about it. I wrote some superhero novel books. In the corner, you can see the cover of it, and that's a discount code to get it on Smashwords if you want it. Yeah. But back to the story. After a small bit of shameless self-promotion. Ah yes, the toe beans. Toe beans splaying so that the claws clicked against the stone. The fox stretched out one black leg, then another, before finally turning to face Nox, its golden eyes glowing in the darkness. Hello. Apparently I gave the fox a sexy voice. I don't know. It said in a smooth voice, its tiny fox lips forming the words perfectly. My name is Zyakohora. A very complicated word to pronounce. Who are you? Nox didn't move the spear, still hovering a few inches in front of the fox's face. Can you hear me? The fox asked, cocking its head to the side. Nox nodded his head slowly, taking a small step back. Don't be afraid, he grinned, showing his rows of sharp teeth. I won't hurt you. You are the bearer of the clavis, and therefore my master as well. What in the hell did the little fluffball mean by that? I can see you don't quite understand. The fox continued, lifting a paw to lick and clean his ear. You were wearing the ring that I am bound to. Therefore, you are my master. It is a fairly simple exchange. What are you? Nox muttered. The fox looked down at its body. I appear to be some sort of fluffy woodland creature. He turned his gaze back up to Nox, gesturing at his body in an oddly human way. Do you know what this shape is called? You're a fox. He hummed, pawing at his tail. I rather enjoy the tail, and the ears are exceptionally functional. Not a bad form to take, I'd say. They are very cute. Form? Ah, yes. It is a little bit confusing, the fox nodded. You see, I am not from wherever this is. He gestured about the cave with his right paw. In fact, I am not sure how I even got here to begin with. I remember being amongst the stars with my brothers and sisters, and then I woke up here. He stared at Nox with his golden eyes. I had the strangest dream about these 3 pairs of eyes staring down at me. They are the ones that told me about the ring and my being bound to it. They said they needed my help, but they were a little skimpy on the details. Do you know what they need? You've seen the eyes too? Oh, yes. I believe they were blue, brown, and ones that looked like they were full of stars. Nox couldn't believe what he was hearing. Do you know who they are? I feel like I know, but I can't seem to remember. Oh, wait, that's the fox talking. Do you know who they are? I feel like I know, but I cannot seem to remember. I have no idea, Nox replied, shaking his head. He still held the spear at the ready. Are you magic? The fox laughed at that, his cackles echoing off the walls. My dear sir, everything is magic. What a silly question. Obviously the fox had never been to Licorice, where magic was being wiped from existence. By force. Uttering even the word in a public space could get a person arrested. Are you going to kill me now? Nox asked, figuring it was time to get to the point. Yes! Or at least he is with the voice I'm giving him. As I said, tall one, you are my master and the bearer of the clavis. Therefore I cannot harm you, nor do I wish to. He swished his tail back and forth over the stone, disturbing a few pebbles. To be honest, with you, I'm not much of a fighter. However, I do enjoy a good romp every now and then. Nothing like chasing the twin moons across the starlit sky in high summer. It's quite delightful. Actually, with that, I don't think I'm doing him posh enough. Nox lowered his spear, his arm thanking him for the relief. He was at a complete loss as to what to do. Not only had he somehow turned a metal cylinder into a ring, he had also summoned a magical talking fox who was absolutely clueless. The fact that they'd both seen the triad of eyes was interesting, but not enough to make him forget about the amount of danger he would be in if he ever escaped the ruins. Anxiety swelled in his chest as he sensed his mortality in a new way. Before, he'd just been trying to survive, postponing death as long as possible. But now that death was quickly approaching. Inevitability was a quickly approaching inevitability, and there was no way to stop it. Even that far underground, it was possible the Holy Knights already knew that magic had taken place. Then again, if that were true, wouldn't they have ventured in to get the cylinder already? He wasn't sure. However, he was sure he'd be discovered as soon as he went topside. Maybe he'd have to live in the hollow forever, always running for his life and living on the edge of starvation. The only choice he had was to find a way to ditch the fox and the ring as quickly as possible. I don't think these MacGuffins will let you, Nox. I'm sorry. I sense some unease in your general vicinity. The fox piped up, jumping up to rest his front paws against Nox's leg. Is there something troubling you? Nox took a few steps back, staring down at the unassuming creature. Don't touch me, he hissed. My apologies, the fox replied, his ears drooping. Is there anything I can do to help ease your mind? Yeah. Go back to where you came from. Nox snapped, his anxiety getting the better of him. Do you realize what you've done? You've sentenced me to death if I ever get out of this hellhole. Magic is illegal, punishable by death in Reala. The Holy Knights will know about you as soon as I'm free of this place, he cried, waving his arms and clutching his left arm, hissing through clenched teeth in pain. I'm dead if I stay here, and I'm dead if I leave. My life is over. He sank down to the ground, resting on his knees. Yeah. Ignore that. Tears formed at the corner of his eyes as he tilted his head down. I promised her I'd stay alive if she needs me. The fox stood as a statue in front of him, his golden eyes glowing in the dark. If he wanted to speak, he didn't show it, as the tears of frustration silently fell down Nox's cheeks. It was a few minutes before they stopped, and Nox's breathing became regular again. Only then did the fox step forward and rest a paw on his knee. I know nothing of this world, he murmured, and I am sorry for any discomfort I have caused you. However, I will do everything I can to help you survive. The eyes said that the clavis would choose only the most worthy person to open for, and it chose you. I have faith in that. Have faith in something neither of us understand or know anything about. Nox scoffed, looking up at the fox. Well, why not? Nobody knows why the grass insists on growing, or why the stars shine. Why should this be any different? What a wise fox. Much pets. Nox glared at the strange creature in front of him. Nothing made sense anymore. That being said, I do know a little bit about myself and what I'm capable of. The fox leaned forward, pressing his nose against Nox's broken arm. At first, he only felt pain as the fox made contact with his bruised skin, but then a strange warmth began to spread over it, like a hot bath after a long day of scrounging. Nox felt the tension and pain in his body melt away. The heat grew intense at the point of the break of his arm, but never painful. After a few moments, the fox pulled away, the warmth subsiding with him. Nox wiggled his fingers and flexed his arm. It was still sore, but it was no longer broken. How did you do that? he asked, his voice soft and full of disbelief. Magic, of course. The good kind. Nox looked at the fox suspiciously. He was thankful for the mending, but still wanted to stay as far away as possible from the arcane as want to stay as far away as possible from the arcane. That's totally what it said. The pain of a broken arm was nothing compared to what Captain Ragvir would do to him if he found out. The fox had to go. What did you say your name was again? Nox asked, rubbing his newly healed arm. Long name. It's not just me! It's not just me! Nox stumbled, trying to form the word. Can I just call you Zuck? The fox smiled. That would be most amiable. I don't know what that word means. Oh, sweet Nox. Someone needs an English lesson. Yes, he laughed. You may call me Zuck. Well, Zuck, Nox sighed, pushing himself to his feet. We need to find a way out of these ruins. He licked his dry lips, lifting the spear high to cast the light over the cavern. And find water soon. By the gods, Zuck yelped, staring at the mound of spider bodies all around the cavern. What happened here? You did. Nox bent down and picked up his still clean dagger, the crystal's light glinting off the steel blade. He tucked it back into its sheath and turned back to Zuck. When the cylinder opened, it killed them all. They were about to eat me. The clavis protected you. Intriguing. I wonder what that means. Your guess is as good as mine. Those eyes didn't tell me anything useful either. This is all quite mysterious. Zuck hummed to himself, prancing around one of the corpses. How exciting. Absolutely thrilling, he said, rolling his eyes. Nox bent down to retrieve his pack. Most of the contents were gone, lost into the rubble, and the bag was mostly shredded. He tossed it aside. Whatever water they found would have to be drunk. Whatever water they found would have to be drunk. There would be no way to carry anymore. Ah, okay, yeah, sorry. Got a little confused. A desperate thought crossed his mind at that moment. Zuck, you can't make water, can you? I'm afraid conjuration isn't really my speciality, he replied, still looking over the corpses. It takes an incredible amount of power to merely transform one thing into another, and how much more to create it out of nowhere. And much more to create it out of nowhere, he sighed. No, I'm afraid we'll just have to find water for you. The hard way. Zuck lifted his nose to the air and began to sniff. However, it seems my sniffer is extremely sensitive. I sense that water is nearby, and I should be able to lead us there. Nox nodded. Lead the way. Convenient, fox. Zuck bounded into the dark, keeping at the edge of the crystal's light so Nox could keep him within sight. They wound their way around the spider corpses and down a long hallway before finally coming to the stairwell once more. It seemed the spiders had taken a second nest after all. As they walked, Nox began to form a plan. Zuck was useful for the moment, and had the kind of animal senses that might be able to get him out of the hollow. Once they were out, he planned to cast the ring into the nearest river and never look back. Maybe Zuck would be forced to follow the ring with the river, or with some luck, he'd vanish altogether. It seemed almost cruel to use him in that way, but Nox had no other choice. Not if he wanted to live. He had to get back to Kalt no matter what. There were people there who were depending on him. Getting rid of the ring and the talking fox would solve most of his problems. Anything else he'd have to figure out on the fly. But what mattered most was returning to his mother. No problem. I don't think it's much further, Zook called from up ahead. Good, Nox replied, a small grin spreading across his face. I am parched. And so am I. On to chapter 13. My internet is, let me touch some wood 1 second. My internet's okay. Ah! Let's not knock my mic. Boop, boop, boop. There we go. Safe. Now we're on chapter 13. We're on 42% of the book. I reckon we can get to halfway today. Tasty water. Can't wait to have the description of Nox having his first water in a very, very long time. I can't believe he wants to abandon the fluffy boy. I get it, but he's a fluffy boy. And he's a fluffy boy. What more do you need? Anyway, chapter 13. It only took an hour to reach the underground river, and by the time they did, Nox was exhausted. Between the dull pain all over his body, and the wounds, and the wounds in his belly, and the last remnants of the spider venom coursing through his veins, he was on the verge of collapse by the time he sank down to his knees at the water's edge. He didn't even check the water. He just plunged his face in and began to drink, the biting cold refreshing his senses. It wasn't bad, although there were hints of sulfur and other minerals that stuck to the back of his tongue. But he didn't care. The water was deep and freezing cold, rushing by at an amazing speed. Zook sniffled the tumultuous surface. Cautiously, and also took a drink, deeming it safe enough to consume. Be a bit late for Nox if it was. After Nox filled his belly with water, he fell backwards onto the stone, splaying his arms out with a sigh. All he wanted to do was sleep. Are you all right? Zook asked, taking a seat behind him, licking one of his paws. Tired, Nox muttered, closing his eyes. I can watch over you while you sleep, if that will make you more comfortable. Nox rolled his head to the side and stared at the fox. Could he trust him? He said that he could. He said that he couldn't harm Nox on purpose. But what if another spider snuck up on them and he just didn't say anything? Was that allowed by the ring? You needn't worry, Zook said, as if he could read Nox's thoughts. I can see that you are slow to trust, and that's understandable. I'll wake you if anything comes near. Nox nodded and pulled the spear close to him as he rolled onto his side, throwing what was left of his cloak over him to keep away the cold. His mind was racing with questions about his new companion. Zook, what did you mean about being among the stars with your siblings? Just that, he said matter-of-factly. That's where I used to live. Welcome back! But how'd you live in such a place? Where'd you get food or water? Zook hummed. I don't recall ever needing those things before. I'm afraid my memories are a bit sparse. I'm mostly a blur. If I knew more, I would share it with you. You really have no idea what you are. Not particularly. To be honest, I don't think I ever thought about it until now. I've always just been myself. And those eyes, whatever they were, they just trapped you and left you here with no explanation? Zyuk looked at the question. Looked as if the question had never crossed his mind. I suppose that may be true. I'm not really sure why they would choose me. From what little I do remember, I don't recall being remarkable in any way. Maybe they knew something I didn't. He turned his head back to Nox, cocking it to the side. So, what is this place, this world? What is your role in it? Nox sighed, knowing he'd have to I can say these words normally. And then I get on stream and I just repropriate to keep things pleasant between them. This world is called Licorice, right now in the Hollow, an ancient underground of ruins and monsters. Yeah, there's something about knowing the internet's watching you that just makes you stop functioning in a small way. Oh god, yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, man. There are many fun words in German, that's for sure. An ancient underground of ruins and monsters. And I don't have a role in this world. I am nobody. The Clavis wouldn't choose nobody to attach itself to. Do you even know what the Clavis is? Not a clue. Zyuk shook his head. But the eyes said it was special. More or less. I wish I had this fox's attitude. It's like, I know nothing. I am here. Whoop-de-doo. No brain. Just floof. They stared at one another for a long moment. So some special piece of metal chose me, and it came with a free magical fox companion. Nox scoffed. That sounds like some trashy bard tale to get tips at a tavern. Zyuk didn't respond. So now what am I supposed to do? Nox asked, holding out his hands. Because right now, my only choice is to either live down here forever or go topside and be executed for using magic. Did you check the scroll? Did you check the instruction manual? What scroll? The scroll that came with the clavis. The instruction manual, Nox. Did you not see it? Nox looked at Zyuk like he was crazy. I believe it's still attached to your skin, unless you remove it, that is. Reaching over, Nox placed his hand on his sleeve, where the cylinder had been hidden. Sure enough, he felt a strange lump there, like a roll of paper. He does have it! Wonderful. He couldn't believe that he hadn't noticed it the entire time. I mean, he was very tired. I'll give him that. He was very, very sleepy. He hadn't eaten or drank in a long time and nearly got eaten by spiders. So, it's okay, Nox. It's okay, baby. See? Zyuk smiled. Sometimes the most elusive answers are right in front of our noses. Uh-huh. Nox nodded, pulling out the roll of paper. I can't believe it came with an instruction manual. As he brought it into the light, he saw it was actually several papers all rolled together. Oh, it's multi-paged and wrapped with a piece of twine. They were clearly old and yellowed, but somehow had resisted the march of time from inside the cylinder. Knox pulled at the small knot holding them closed and gently unrolled the papers one at a time. "Can you read that?" Knox asked suddenly a few inches from his face. Knox didn't look up. The pages were covered in strange runes that he'd never seen before. Ah! It is an instruction manual in the wrong language! Similar to those that had been carved in the ruins above. He reached out and ran a finger over the pages, feeling the thick ink that had been painted onto the parchment. As he did, the runes alighted with a dull orange glow. It spread like a ripple from his finger to the edge of the page. A strange sensation buzzed against his fingertips as he jerked his hand away from the parchment glowing in the dark, growing dark once more. "Well, that was interesting," Zyuk commented. "I wonder what that means." "Can you read it?" "I don't think I can read anything." "Helpful. I apologize." "Stop saying that." Zyuk remained quiet as Knox flipped through the rest of the pages, hoping to find a way to get rid of them and the fox. Each of them made up of the same runes as the first and completely illegible. However, as he flipped to the very last sheet, he saw a complex series of geometric shapes and runes scrawled across the page. At the top, he's gotten to the washing bit. This is so it's the symbols for whether you can put it in the washing machine, or whether you have to wash it by hand, or whether you can tumble dry it. That's what these symbols are. It's the only explanation. At the top were a few notes drawn into the edges, and at the centre was a single blank circle the size of his fingertips. I believe that means you can put it in the washing machine. Yes. "Whoa," Zyuk murmured, looking down at the page. "That's a very powerful way to wash it." Knox glanced up at him, lifting an eyebrow. "You can't read anything else, but you can read this. There's not even words on it. My brethren and I are very practiced in the arcane, so yes, I can read this one. Although you are mistaken, there are plenty of words here, but it's in the language of the gods." He speaks the language of the gods. "There aren't any gods," Knox replied. "Not anymore." Zyuk stared at him for a moment, as if waiting for him to finish. But when Knox said nothing, he continued. "This is a spell, and a powerful one at that. It will transport you to a new location in an instant." "Oh, convenient fast travel spell." "Where does it go?" Zyuk shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know." You said you could read it." "I can, but it doesn't have a location listed." He leant down closer to the page, his wet nose nearly pressed against the dry parchment. Spells like this must be created in the place that they take you to. Wherever the spell was inked is where you'll appear once you activate it. Oh, that's cool. Write the spell before you go to work, use your teleport to get back. Convenient. "How far can it take me?" "Anywhere in the cosmos." "How does it work?" "In this case, I believe you must place your finger at the center of the scroll and speak its name." Knox carefully moved his fingers to the edge of the page. "What's its name?" Zyuk studied it for a few moments. "Lanaway." "Lanaway," Knox whispered under his breath. The temptation to press his finger to the parchment at that very moment was overwhelming. It is the magical equivalent of a red button. He'd be out of the hollow in an instant. However, where he found himself could be worse than his current situation. It could lead directly into the king's court, or right into the headquarters of the Holy Knights for all he knew. It could be a trap set by the fox, or the eyes in his vision, neither of which he trusted. Now, not only did he have a magical fox, but he was also in possession of actual spells written on paper. Immediately he rolled the parchment up and tried to throw it into the rushing river, only to have it stuck once again to his hand. MacGuffins say no. Knox cried out in frustration. Fucking fuck! What is this bullshit? I'm afraid that's not going to work, Zyuk said, shaking his head as he watched. The Clavis has chosen you. You said that already! Knox snapped, stuffing the papers back in his sleeve and out of the way. He tried to yank off the ring as well, but it only seemed to tighten around his finger, getting stuck below the knuckle. So much for his plan to throw it in the river or cast it away once he left the hollow. How the fuck do I get unchosen? A look of confusion came across Zook's face. Why would you want that? It's a great honor. Look at me, Knox cried. I am nobody. I am just some guy that got lost in the most dangerous place in the world and has nearly died several times in the past few hours. I am hurt, I am exhausted, and now I'm dripping in magical shit that's going to get me killed. I don't want any part of this. There's no honor in being dead. Zyuk didn't respond. I don't know if this is some sort of fun fucking adventure for you, but it isn't for me. I came here to survive because there were no other places to rob. Zyuk gave him an incredulous look. It's true. I came here to steal things and sell them off for money so I could buy food and medicine. When I found that cylinder, I thought it would get me a fortune, but after that, everything went totally fucking wrong. Knox threw himself back to the ground, rolling away from Zyuk. Ugh, I wish I'd never come here. I should have just kept to myself like I always do and found a different way like Abby said. This is all my fault. Eep, eep. There was a long pause. Knox, just leave me the fuck alone. No worries. Have a good evening. Knox, the fox repeated a bit more urgently. Yeah, I was happy you arrived. Bye-bye. What the fuck do you want? Knox asked, rolling over to face him. Zyuk wasn't looking at him, but into the distant darkness. Following his gaze, he looked back down the path from whence they came. There, floating in the darkness, were two pairs of crackling blue eyes. His heart nearly stopped at the sight. At that moment, his ears picked up the telltale rattling breath, so low it was barely audible over the rushing river. The Draugi had found him once again. Picked a hell of a time to leave there. The Draugi are back. Holy duck. Poor Knox, though. He's just so stressed. And I don't blame him. Everything's just gone wrong. So very, very wrong. And he can't even read the instruction manual. I can't believe that. I'm like, oh, by the way, you should probably check the scroll. Wait, what? Ah. But unfortunately there was a devil in the details that he couldn't read the language. At least it has a powerful washing up spell. That's fun. But now the Dragir are back. We know how scary they were. They were pretty nasty. But he does have a magical fox now, so let's see how round 2 goes. Fight! Nox was on his feet in less than a second, his spear clutched firmly in his hands, and levelled the Dragir, who stood no more than 20 feet away. In the dim light illuminated their exposed bones, making them glimmer in the darkness. His body was sore and exhausted. He had barely enough energy to keep the spear levelled at the Dragir, and it was running out fast. Zyuk backed up a few paces, his body pressing against Nox's leg. The hair along his spine. I think that means to be along his spine, and there might be a little bit of an error there. The hair along his spine was standing straight up, and his teeth were bared. Abomination, Zyuk hissed, glaring at the Dragir. This magic shouldn't be here. Nox didn't have time to think about what he meant, as the Dragir took another step forward, both of them drawing their rusted swords from rotten scabbards. It was plain that they were the same individuals from before, though some inexplicable power they were able to find him, probably honing in on the clavis once more. Nox had hoped its call would have faded when it changed forms, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Even without pupils, he could tell they were focused on his left hand, where the ring now sat, although their gazes seemed to dart to Zyuk every few seconds as well. Now that the Clavs' power had been released, he didn't know what they would do. What do you do? What do you want? Nox shouted at them, brandishing a spear. Why do you keep following me? The clavis. The clavis cannot leave this city. The one true God demands blood. The other added, taking a step forward. Thievery is punished by death. He is angry. Give us the clavis. Give us the clavis. Their words echoed through the tunnel, washed away by the rush of the river. Nox took another step back, Zyuk close at his side. The Draugi continued to push forward. The clavis has awoken. You cannot be allowed to leave this city. To leave this city of rubble and stone. Nox drove his spear towards the closest one, piercing it between the ribs. He jerked the weapon back, hoping it would go down, but the Draugr took another step, showing no signs of slowing, just like before. What do we do? Nox asked, looking down at Zyuk. I don't know, he replied, the fear evident in his voice. They can't be killed by physical force. Dark magic binds them to this world and their duty. Nox's foot struck the river's edge, nearly slipping into the dark, rushing water. He gritted his teeth in frustration. There was no choice but to stand his ground. I'm not going down without a fight. Nox growled and rushed forward. The Draugr didn't expect the attack, and Nox was able to strike each of them before they got a chance to parry his blows away. He managed to break a few ribs before he jumped back, drawing his spear close to his side. They were quick to retaliate. Their rusted swords arced through the air, both aiming directly for his chest. He knocked them both away, ducking to the ground and rolling out of their reach. Springing to his feet, he thrust the spear over and over, burying it deep in their bodies. But just like before, they didn't react to the blows. Instead, they continued to lay into him, looking for any opening to run him through. A lucky swing landed the head of the spear on one of the Dragier's hands, knocking the sword from his grasp. It felt like a small triumph as it skittered across the ground, but the other one doubled his efforts to make up for the loss, nearly bringing Nox to his knees. He was doing everything he could to deflect the blows, but his movements were growing slower and slower, the exhaustion finally taking hold of his limbs. "Help!" Zyuk cried suddenly from a few feet away. Nox turned his attention to the river's edge, where Zyuk still stood. He hadn't noticed that the other Draugr had rearmed himself and was now bearing down on the small fox. "Oh no! Not the fuzzy boy!" Zyuk was fast enough to avoid the swings as the sword sparked off the stone, but with the river at his back, he had nowhere to run. Another crushing blow came down on Nox, one aimed for his head, and he barely deflected it in time. His energy was running out fast. "Nox!" Zyuk yelled again. Getting rid of the fox had been the plan all along. It was the only way he'd survive once he got out of the ruins. But as he heard the fox's cries fill the cavern, something inside him shifted. Yes! The cries reminded him of Abby's siblings, as he realized how helpless the fox really was. He needed to save Zyuk if he could. Nox ducked under another swing and thrust his leg out, sweeping the Draugr off his feet. The bones collided with the floor, the armor clattering loudly against the stone. He kicked the rusted sword away and turned back to the river just in time to see the second land a kick into Zyuk's ribs. The tiny fox yelped and was lifted off his feet, flying several feet over the water before crashing into the surface. Rushing water swallowed him up instantly, and he was gone, carried away by the current. Nox didn't hesitate for a moment. He ran forward, ignoring the second Draugr, and dove into the freezing river. The shock of cold numbed his body instantly, causing his limbs to freeze up. Only his determination brought him back to the surface, gasping for air. Nox struggled to keep his head above the rolling water as he was rushed far away from the Draugr and their murderous intent. Still grasping for his spear. He lifted his head above the water, trying to find Zyuk in the dim crystal's light. Among the tumultuous white water, he was easy to find, but he wasn't swimming, merely floating on the surface, tossed by the river's current. Nox paddled his way over, fighting against the pull of the water. He reached out to grab Zyuk. But as he did, his body collided with a large boulder, knocking the wind out of him and pushing him under once again. The stones hid in the darkness, and each time he struck one, a new blossom of pain enveloped his cold, numbed mind. Finally, he broke the surface again, choking on the water as he did. Choking on the water he'd partially inhaled. He lifted the spear again and searched. Zyuk's body was a few yards ahead, and still unmoving. Nox tore at the water, doing everything he could to get a hold of him, narrowly avoiding the spiky rock thing, hanging low from stalactite. That's again another one of those words where, like, I know it. But then I'm streaming and I don't know it anymore. I know words. He finally managed to get a handful of fur and pulled Zyuk towards him. Immediately, he lifted the fox's unresponsive head out of the water and held onto him tightly. The river battered him back and forth as it carried them away, each collision hurting less and less as the cold leached through his bones. There wasn't enough light to see much, and Nox was quickly losing the energy to keep his head above the water. A dull roar in the distance caught his attention. There wasn't enough light to make out what was causing it, but Nox had a feeling whatever it was wouldn't be good. The further they went on, the louder it got, until at the last moment, he realized what it was. Before he could form the word waterfall in his mind, he was airborne, free of the freezing water and the rush of the river. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. But gravity took a hold, and he wily coyoted. And Nox found himself plunging into the darkness with no idea of what lay beneath him. He fell for what seemed like hours, not knowing if he would hit water or stone, but bracing himself for both. Suddenly he struck the surface and was submerged without time to take a breath. He sank quickly, the violently churning water dragging his body over stones, creating more bruises on top of the ones he already had. One hand gripped his spear, while the other held on tightly to Zyuk. Without knowing what direction he was going, he kicked off the stones, desperate to find the surface. His lungs were burning as he kicked, the weight of his soaked clothes slowing him down. Just when he thought he was about to burst his head, his head broke the surface, and he gasped with misty air filling his lungs. Coughing and spluttering, he lifted the spear, letting the light dance across the water. All around him, the surface had turned still and dark. No longer rushing or churning beneath him. In the distance, he could hear the roar of the waterfall. It dawned on him that he was in an underground lake of some kind. Teeth chattering, he spun on the spot, searching for any hint of a shoreline. To his surprise, he noticed many of the glowing crystal structures jutting out of the walls and ceiling. Following those that looked closest, he began to swim. His arms had gone completely numb, and it felt like he was barely moving. His soaked clothing and Zyuk's fur weighing him down, shallow breaths were all he could draw. The cold tightening his muscles, nearly to the point of paralysis. He felt an overwhelming sense of relief when his feet finally touched the bottom and he could stand, no longer having to keep himself afloat in the pitch-black water. Scrambling on his hands and knees, he pulled himself up on the cold stone ledge, overlooking the water, tossing his spear to the ground. Laying Zyuk down gently, he looked at the fox, wondering what he should do. He didn't know how much water he'd swallowed, or if he was still alive for that matter. Nox put his ear close to the fox's mouth. There was no breath. Lifting him gently, Nox tipped him backwards, hoping to get the water out of his lungs. As soon as he was moved, he began to cough, and Nox breathed a relieved sigh. Oh! The fox is okay. He held the tiny fox to his body, knowing there wasn't anything to keep him warm. 10 minutes ago, he wanted Zyuk out of his life completely. And now he found himself wondering if his thoughts had brought undeserved pain on that pitiful creature. I hate Draugia. Zook coughed, shivering in Nox's arms. Why would the gods allow that here? Dark magic like that shouldn't be allowed. I told you, Nox replied, shivering as well. There are no gods. Not anymore. Zook was quiet for a moment. It's so cold. I don't have anything to help you with that. Nox sighed, pulling the fox tighter. My pack was destroyed by the spiders. Oh god. Oh no, there's my yawns. The yawns are here. We're not going to do 3 and we're not going to earn my sticker. No, not today. Maybe I can help, Zook replied, pushing himself out of Nox's arms. He wobbled on his feet, barely able to stand, his fur still dripping with water. Taking a step forward, he closed his eyes, his muscles quivering with the desperate attempt to create warmth. His tail drooped and his ears went flat against his head. For a long moment, he stayed that way. Just as Nox was about to say something, he saw a ripple in the air in front of the fox. He reached out to touch it, but pulled his hand back, realizing it was hot. In the space of a blink, a small flame popped into existence, hovering a few inches off the ground. It swelled to the size of a melon and stayed there, making almost no noise. Oh, that's strange. No crackles. I like fire crackles. Zook swayed on the spot and fell over, Nox catching him before he hit the ground. Waves of warmth washed over them both. And for the briefest of moments, Nox caught himself being glad for the strange magic. I won't be able to keep it going for long, Zook muttered, sounding like he was on the verge of passing out. Get warm and dry while you can. Nox laid Zook down on the floor, making sure he wasn't too close to the enchanted flames to be harmed. Piece by piece he stripped off his clothing, placing them in the circle around the fire. Left only in his trousers, he placed himself as close as he dared, savouring the intense heat. Within a few moments, he found his eyelids drooping. Before he could resist, sleep took him away from the discomfort of the hollow. Well, damn. Just when you think he hasn't done enough falling, he falls into a bloody river and then falls down a blooming waterfall. Poor boy. So much pain. So much pain. Ugh. I guess he doesn't need water anymore for a little while. And now he's got a convenient fox, so we're good. Anyway, I need water. Blah. Yeah. How very, very, very bad. Oh, Nox. Just when you think he hasn't been through enough. Nearly been eaten by spiders. So he's nearly been murdered by Draugia twice, fallen down a ravine, nearly been eaten by spiders, and now fallen down a waterfall as well. What more can nearly kill Nox in chapter 15? It was cold again when Nox awoke, the cavern pitch dark except for the crystal's glow, and a few feet away his entire body was sore to his bones, and his joints ached from the cold that had seeped into them in the river. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. You need a warm bed and a tasty din-dins. That's what you need. The fire was gone, but a small bundle of fur was curled up against his torso, creating a small warm spot on his belly. Oh, cute. He was happy to see Zyuk was still alive. After all, he sort of owed the fox his life. And if he hadn't conjured that fire, the icy air of the cavern would have taken them both in their sleep. The same small voice of reason popped into his head, telling him to grab his things and leave the fox behind. He should know that that's like dumb at this point, or get rid of him as soon as they escaped the hollow. But Nox pushed it away. The ring wouldn't come off his finger, and neither would the rolled up spells. No matter how much he wanted them gone, they seemed insistent on staying. Yes, MacGuffins. Remembering the scroll, he looked at his left forearm. Ooh, they were still there, which is honestly incredibly impressive considering everything he's been through. He pulled them open, looking the markings over. It was as if they'd never gotten wet. The paper and the ink were completely undamaged. In fact, they somehow looked cleaner than they had before. Nox rolled them back and pushed them down into his pocket. "Not gonna throw it away," he whispered into the darkness, believing it with all his will and letting the scroll go. To his surprise, it came away from his skin without issue. I see, the MacGuffin is just very fussy. It knows his intent. Remaining neatly tucked into his pocket. That was at least one thing out of the way. He tried the ring one more time, whispering the same thing out loud as he pulled. It didn't budge. Somehow it seemed the items could tell when he was lying. Even if he wanted to believe it himself, they would be a problem if he ever found his way back to Keld. He couldn't shake the thought of being captured and tortured from his mind. Many times he'd seen people taken by the captain of the guard, and many times he'd seen their bodies hanging in the town square for the crows to feast on. If he was caught, he knew those closest to him, including his mother and Abby, would suffer a similar fate. Well, how mean they won't just murder him and, not his friends and family. That would be lovely if they could leave them alone. The image flashed in his mind as he pushed himself up to get away from it, disturbing Zyuk in the process. Oh, it's truly gotta be it is the fox, yes. Didn't count. "Everything all right?" Frox asked, a large yawn displaying his sharp canines. Yeah, fine." Nox replied gruffly, looking away from him. Zyuk looked like he wanted to ask him more, but stayed quiet. Nox pushed himself to his feet and began to gather his clothing, slipping the mostly dry pieces back on as he went. "Thanks again," he said without looking towards Zyuk. "For the fire, I mean." "Of course. I, thought you said you weren't good at conjuring things." "I'm not. That's why I couldn't do it for long." Zyuk licked one of his paws half-heartedly. "I'll need a decent meal and a lot more rest before I can do something like that again. The magic in this world is weak and hard to get a hold of. That, and this body is not used to channeling such things. Up until today, I didn't think magic was even real," Nox replied, sliding on his boots. "I've heard rumors about it, but I didn't believe any of them. At least, not anymore." "This place is so strange." Zyuk looked around the cavern. "I can feel magic in the air, in everything, but something is holding it at bay. I don't know what it could be. It's almost like it's being covered up with a thick blanket." I can't feel anything. Nux reached up to adjust his bandana and found it was missing. He scooped up the spear and held it high to cast a light over the area, but there was no scrap of cloth amongst his clothing. A twinge of fear pulsed through his body. "You're an elf," Zyuk observed, not missing a beat. Nox spun around and glared at him. "No, I'm not," he said through gritted teeth. "Don't say such things out loud. I didn't mean to offend," Zyuk stammered. Nox reached up and ran fingers over his pointed ears, feeling the scars from where he tried to cut the tip. Oh no! Self-harm warning. Where he tried to cut the tips off himself long ago. He'd been unable to complete the job, the pain too intense and the amount of blood nauseating. It had been a long time since he'd been caught without his bandana in the open. For the first time, he was glad they were underground. At least no one would be able to see him down there and know his lineage. Nox took a deep breath. "Sorry," he grumbled. "It's not something I'm proud of. And it's dangerous." "It seems this world is full of nothing but danger," Zyuk commented, stepping over to Nox. "We should keep walking." Nox turned and looked out across the lake. There wasn't enough night to see the other side, but they needed to keep moving. A small strip of stone lined the outer ring of the lake. He decided to go left and hoped they'd eventually find an exit. The water had to leave the cavern somewhere. Zyuk kept close to his side. "Can I ask you a question?" he asked after a few minutes of silence. "Yeah, I guess. Why is it so bad to be an elf?" Nox sighed. "Elves are known to have naturally strong connection to magic. Like I said before, magic is illegal and punishable by death in the kingdom of Riala." He looked down at Zyuk, meeting his golden eyes. They are the first to be kidnapped or killed by the Holy Knights, whether they can use magic or not. I've seen it happen, and I don't want to be next. Everything in life is harder when you're like me. Who are these knights? They work for the king. Nox didn't really want to think about them, but the fox needed to understand what was at risk. Why he was so hesitant to speak. They go around the kingdom looking for people who are breaking the law and kill them. Sometimes they do other work for the king as well, but mostly they just keep people in check. Why is magic against the law? Surely it would help a lot of people. The king believes that magic is the reason the gods died in the first place. He seems to think that if we stop using up their power, they'll find a way to come back. Only the highest ranking officers among the knights are allowed to use any, and only in the name of Riala. Zyuk looked up at Nox. "Oh, that doesn't make any sense. They can't use magic, but they can use magic, but the people can't. Where is the sense in that?" It doesn't have to make sense," Nox growled, growing frustrated by the endless questions. "That's just the way it is. Sense has nothing to do with whether or not they'll chop your head off in the town square." "Shouldn't somebody do something? They need to be stopped." Nox froze in his tracks and looked down at the fox. "By all means," he said, gesturing out over the underground lake. "Go do something about it. You and your army can march on the king's castle and take it by storm. Then after that we can all sing campfire songs and feast until we die of old age in a land of never-ending happiness." Duke stared at him. Well, it's wrong. Yeah? And what the fuck does that have to do with anything? Knox waited a moment longer. No longer, holding back a lifetime's worth of irritation. Right and wrong are things only those in power have the free time to care about. He turned away. The more people the king kills, the longer the rest of us will live. There was a long pause. You don't mean that. I don't like it, but it's the truth. Even if somebody managed to stop the king, someone else just as bad or worse would eventually take his place. That's what happened for 1,000 years, and what will always happen. Knox turned away from the fox and kept on walking. I don't know where you're from, but that's how things work here in Nicholas. I think you're wrong, Zook said, trailing along behind him. You'll come to accept the truth in time, just like the rest of us. Neither of them spoke to one another for a long time. Knox was lost in his thoughts, wondering if it had been right to tell Zook those things, especially with so much anger in his heart. All of them were true, at least in his experience. It was better if the fox learned the way of things fast before they were both killed by the Holy Knights. That is, if they ever found their way out of the hollow. Between the spiders and the Draugr, Knox wasn't sure if they stood much of a chance. And now they were even deeper underground, taken to unknown places by the rush of the river. Getting back to the sunlit world seemed as much a fleeting dream as escaping the keen eyes of the knights with the talking fox. Knox knew Zook would have the best chance of survival, as long as he stayed away from the cities, and he hoped the tiny creature would heed his warnings. It seemed unfair that someone who had just been released should be killed on sight as soon as they stepped foot in civilization. Listen, Knox sighed after his anger had finally faded away. I'm not telling you these things to be an asshole. I need you to understand how much danger we're both in if we make it out of here. He looked down at Zook, trying to keep his expression friendly. If the knights find out what you are, you'll be taken away, and I don't know what they'll do to you. If they find me with this ring or the scrolls, I'll be tortured and killed as an example to everyone else. He paused for a moment. False hope doesn't help anyone. And it definitely won't save us from Captain Ragvir. Zook remained silent. I am sorry, I shouted. I've not had the most practice talking with others, especially with those who don't know my way of life. Oh, I thought that was Zook talking and I got confused. Yeah. It's okay, Zook muttered, his head hanging low. I don't know anything about this world, or the forces that are pressing against us. All I can say is that something is wrong here, and I intend to find out what it is. Knox stopped in his tracks. Why? You don't owe anyone that. Why not go out and have a life of your own? Nobody deserves you solving their problems. Zook stared at him for a long moment, as if such a thought had never occurred to him. I want to help. Living amongst the stars teaches you many lessons, but never allows you to really interact with real things. I believe I was brought here for a reason, and if there was anything worth doing, it seems like figuring out why this world is in such a terrible state would be it. Once I know, maybe I can do something to fix it. That would help everyone. Knox shook his head. You're a weird creature. I'll take that as a compliment. Zook nodded, his tail whisking back and forth. And Nox, for what it's worth, I think you're wrong. About what? That there's no hope left. His golden eyes fixed on Nox with an intensity he hadn't seen before. As long as there are those that are willing to try, there is always hope. Maybe you're right. Nox looked back over the lake, leaning against his spear. But that isn't important right now. First we need to find a way out of here. Once we're topside, you can do whatever you feel is right. Follow me. You know the way out? Nope. Nick said, trotting off in front of him. Then how do you know where you're going? This isn't another hope thing, is it? I told you, my sniffer is really good. There's fresh air this way. Nox shook his head, following after the fox in the dark. He didn't want to admit it, but that tiny creature was already growing on him. As he should. Zook Protection Squad. What a soft boy. Just wants to help things. He's just like, oh, this sounds dumb. Let's try fix the world. Good fluffy boy. Time for some hydration. Yes. I think I'm gonna pray that this chapter isn't one of those super duper 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 long ones, and give it a go. Hopefully it's not, like I said, not too long, and we can end in about half an hour. But we have hit the halfway mark of this book, which is great, but that means it's probably going to take another like 5 streams to get through it, which is cool and all, but I do kind of want to do a Halloween story time. So we're probably going to have to take a small break of this book at some point this month. But I'm sure that'll be okay, just to miss 1 week. I'll still do the catch-ups and stuff every week. But now, will they find the outside? True to his word, Zook found the exit from the underground lake. Following his nose, he led both of them through a series of naturally formed caverns, following the river as long as they could. Their bellies growled as they walked. Wah. More than once they passed strange fungi growing on the walls. Both of them weren't brave or desperate enough to try taking a prey. I'm surprised they're not desperate enough, I won't lie. It has been a long time since Nox last ate anything. Instead, they filled their stomachs with water, trying to sedate the hunger that crawled at their insides. After several close calls in the past 2 days, they were pleasantly surprised and relieved to find the caverns deserted. Neither of them had enough strength to fight the Draugr or spiders again, and the constant walking kept them in a state of near exhaustion. After the long hours of hiking, Zook led them through another skinny tunnel where the rivers kept close to the walls. The stones were slippery and their path was little more than a foot wide. Zook had a little trouble with the path, but Nox in it. I got it wrong. Yes, the usual. Zook had little trouble with the path, but Nox nearly fell into the river twice before crossing, the icy water licking his heels. On the other side of the tunnel opened up once more into a large domed cavern. The floor was unnaturally smooth, and the outer walls seemed like they had been carved away by hand. Nox spotted a set of stairs on the far side, winding upward inside a massive pair of rune-carved arches. He breathed a sigh of relief as he saw that thankfully they were not covered in spider silk. Yay! I can smell it, Zook said, lifting his nose high in the air as he started at the stairwell. There's an opening to the outside here. I'm not sure how far, but it's gotten stronger than I've smelled so far. Let's hope it's close, Nox replied. We don't have a way to carry any water, and I don't think I could handle the weight anyway. Zook looked up at Nox, his golden eyes glowing in the darkness. We'll make it out. I know it. I'll let you do the positivity thing by yourself, Nox chuckled. That's not really my style. Zook nodded, smiling in his own foxish way before both of them headed back to the river, filling up their starving bellies with water one last time. They headed for the stairway and upward to whatever waited them above. It took them an hour to climb the massive set of stairs, with a few breaks needed along the way to catch their breaths. The stairs had been carved tall, and by the time they reached the landing at the top, Nox was on the verge of collapse, his legs burning with exhaustion. Zook, although much smaller, was just as bad off and slumped to the ground, panting with his tongue lolled out onto the stone. Nox leaned against the wall, still gripping the spear with the crystal tied to the handle. Glancing around, he saw another carved archway framing the top of the stairs, this time with different runes on its surface. Although he couldn't read them, he was starting to think the runes were directions, or at least labels for where the stairs led. Beyond the top landing, the light grew dim, but he could just catch faint outlines of structures a few yards away. The cavern ceilings sloped high above their heads, crystal formations dotting the surface like stars in the night sky. They were back inside the ruins, although how far the river and the tunnels are taking them he had no idea, and he wasn't even sure if they were in the same city, but everything looked the same in the dark. Which way should we go? Nox asked, looking down at the fox, slowly forcing himself to his feet. I am not sure, he replied, lifting his nose back to the air and sniffing. Everything smells the same here. There's definitely fresher air here. Through the middle it is then, Nox nodded, tapping his spear on the ground. Maybe there'll be a big sign with an arrow that says, "This way out, somewhere along the road." Zook looked up at him in confusion, and Nox let his face spread into a wide grin. Realizing it was a joke, Zook smiled back, his eyes glimmering in the light. Come on, let's get out of here. Ignoring the aching in their legs, they headed into the ruined city in front of them. With his spear held high, Nox led the way, trying to shed as much light as he could on the surrounding area. Buildings came into view, their almost glossy exteriors reflecting the light. They looked much the same as the buildings he'd seen before. However, this area seemed to be more heavily devastated than the other, confirming that they were indeed a different ruin. Many of the homes were toppled, their shells collapsing and the streets full of debris. Corpses were more prevalent and mostly unarmored. Oh no. They weren't the bodies of warriors, but of families and children who had tried to escape a city under attack. Disintegrating carts full of household goods sat rotting in the street, with their owners close by, never having reached the surface. What happened to all these people? Zook asked, sniffing at one of the corpses that fell to dust the moment he touched it. This is terrible. I've heard stories, Nox replied, looking down at the devastation. These cities predated the decimation, but none of them survived long afterwards. The decimation? When the gods died. Zyuk stopped, sniffing and turning his gaze to Nox. How did they die? I'm no expert, but the stories say the gods killed each other, driven mad by the greed of men. Nox leaned down to look at the corpse of a young child, still held in their mother's arms. Mankind wanted magic for themselves, and they stole it from the gods. When the gods couldn't find their power, they went insane. First, they marched on the empires of the world, searching for their lost magic. After the slaughter of anyone in sight, they turned on each other until one by one they fell, the last succumbing to its wounds from the final battle. He looked at Zyuk. That's why magic is forbidden. The king believes if he removes the magic users from the population, it will allow the gods to recover their power and come back to put the world to rights. Zyuk let his eyes drift over the scene of devastation in front of him. That doesn't seem to be possible. But then again, neither does any of this devastation. He turned back to Nox. How could the gods of this world lose their power? No offense, but mankind doesn't seem clever enough to pull off something like that. That's just what I've heard. I wasn't there, so I don't know anything else beyond what I've been told. Nox pushed himself back to his feet, patting the dust away from his hands. That was over 1,000 years ago, and only a handful of the ancient cities still stand, although they all look a lot worse than this one. And what became of the gods? You said they died, but how is that possible? They aren't mortal. I don't know. Their graves are scattered across Licorice, massive bones jutting out from the land, and sea where land and sea are all that's left. Everyone who's foolish enough to visit them never returns, so nobody goes anymore. Zyuk was quiet for a moment, his tail twitching. Questions upon questions. And not a lot of answers in this world. That you can be sure of, especially in Realia. People who are struggling to survive don't have a lot of time to dig up ancient and dangerous mysteries. Do you want to know what happened? Knocked to Zyuk, whose tail... Oh. Oh no, did my stream die again? Are we back? Okay, sorry. Something blurred a little bit on my thing and I thought my stream had died again. But no, we're okay! Despite the fact that I didn't give the router an offering today, it has still blessed me with a full stream, so we're okay. We're okay. A-okay. It's just that my live counter thing on my Streamlabs now says, oh well. Oh well. We're still okay. Alive. Anyway. He looked back at Zyuk, whose tail had stopped twitching. I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but keeping me and my mother fed is hard enough without worrying about everything else too. I understand. And I admire that you put your family first. There's no shame in that, Zyuk replied, nodding his head. Thank you for sharing what you know. Nox smiled back at him. He was starting to enjoy the fox's company more and more. He knew he shouldn't be thinking about keeping him around. But the thought crossed his mind more than once. Oh, Noxie, you don't have a choice. You can't get rid of any of the other MacGuffins. Why do you think you can get rid of him? Silly boy. But the thought crossed his mind more than once as they travelled through the hollow. Without Zyuk, he wouldn't have made it out of the cavern system alive. That much was certain. At the very least, he could make sure he got on his way to begin with, off towards whatever answers he was searching for. However, taking him to Kald would not be an option, not if either of them wanted to stay alive. Hey, Zyuk! A shrill yelp pierced the silence of the cavern, startling Nox so much he nearly dropped his spear. Zyuk hit the ground hard in a puff of dust, a thin rusted blade sticking out of his back. No! Nox rushed over to him, skidding to a stop. The blade had nearly gone clean through his leg, and the blood was welling up around the wound, soaking the black fur. He turned his gaze upward to see a pair of crackling blue eyes staring back at him only a few yards away. For fuck's sake! Well, we thought they were safe because they were so far away. No! Does the Draugr ever bloody give up? Then another popped into existence at its side. A rattling breath filled the silence. The Draugr had found them again. Gathering up the fox in his arms as carefully as he could, Nox vaulted back to his feet. He couldn't fight, and he couldn't protect Zyuk at the same time. Instead, he threw his spear over his shoulder, the leather strap creaking in protest, and took off in the opposite direction of the Draugr. He needed to get as far away from them as possible, and finding his way out of the hollow at last would be their only chance of survival. It seemed unlikely the skeletons would follow them beyond the borders of the ruins. At least he hoped so. Nox's feet dug into the stone as he ran through the chaos-ridden streets. He jumped over the corpses and carts alike, trying to put as much space between him and the Draugr as possible. Even going as fast as possible, he could still hear the clanking of bones and armour behind him as they kept pace. In front of him, there seemed to be nothing but endless winding streets, each full of more debris than the last. He kept on running, taking random turns to try lose them in the labyrinth. After an abrupt right turn, Nox came face to face with a collapsed building that completely blocked the street. Knowing he didn't have time to double back, he ducked into an open doorway without slowing down. A quick glance showed that there was no back entrance, but there was a set of stone stairs on the far side. Lunging up them 3 at a time, he found himself at what could have been described as a second floor. If it hadn't been sheared away a long time ago by some explosive force. He turned around on the spot, looking for a way out. There was nowhere else to go. Fuck. Nox hissed through his teeth as his eyes darted back and forth. His gaze fell upon the roof of the next building over. It was easily a 10-foot jump to the broken tiles. Without time to think it over, Nox reeled back and took off, running to the edge of the roof and leaping over the broken stone. It wasn't until he was mid-air that he realised the roof was probably too rotten to hold his weight. As soon as his feet touched it, he knew he was right. His body crashed, just because he hadn't fallen enough. Someone give this boy wings. Terrible. His body crashed through the tiles and onto the stone floor below. Dust and rubble thrown in every direction. Broken beams and stone crashed into him, making everything hurt. as he rolled across the floor. Thankfully, Zook stayed gently tucked into his arm for protection. Nox ignored the pain. He had to. Spraying back to his feet, he ran down the stairs and out of the front of the house, finding himself on the other side of the collapse that had blocked his way. Without a backwards glance, he continued running. A minute later, he skidded to a halt in front of the cavern wall. He glanced down both sides, looking for some sign as to where the exit might be. In the distance, to his left, he saw the road continue to the wall's edge without stopping. He didn't know if that was the way out, but he didn't have time to think and sprinted in that direction regardless. Sure enough, he found another archway there and slipped around the corner, hardly glancing at the massive carved mural on the tunnel walls. The path led him on a slight incline, which seemed like a good sign, although his thighs burned with exertion. Many times the tunnel split off into different directions, but he kept onto the cobblestone path running down the centre. The joy that flushed through his system when he saw the first hints of sunlight was indescribable. Filling him with energy and hope, Nox dashed forward, heading for the exit at last. With Zyuk still clutched in his arms, he burst out of the cavern entrance and on into the brilliance of the late afternoon sun. The light nearly blinded him as he held up an arm to shield his eyes, relief flooding his system. He found himself standing on the side of a tall hill composed of broken rocks and scrubby trees. Below him, a sea of green grass stretched out as far as the eye could see, and the sweet smell of wildflowers took over his senses. He'd never been so happy to see the Jade Lowlands in all his life. "We made it, Zyuk," he shouted. "We're out!" There was no response from the tiny fox in his arms. Leaning down to put an ear against the cold nose, he was still breathing, unconscious, but still breathing. Blood trailed across his fur and soaked into Nox's clothing. Zyuk was losing more blood than expected. "Don't worry. You're gonna be okay, I promise." The words were the same as the ones he told his mother before he left. Just then, a strangled cry echoed up the tunnel from behind him. Nox jogged a few yards down the mountain before he turned to see both of the Jaragia running up to the edge of the cave, holding their arms to block the sun. For a brief moment, he hoped it would keep them at bay, but as they slowly began to creep forward, that hope died away and was replaced by cold dread. Changing his grip on Zyuk, Nox dug his heels in once more, running down the field of broken rocks towards the grassy valley below. He had to keep moving no matter what. The Jaragia had been slowed for a moment, and it was the only advantage he had. If he was lucky, he could lose them in the tall grass, or at least find a place to rest while he bandaged Zyuk up. Nox dodged a few thorny bushes, leaping over the last of the sharp stones as he finally reached the tall grass. Quickly it stretched up to his waist, and he found himself having to hold Zyuk up as he forced his way through. The terrifying cries still sounded behind him, although they seemed further away. But he didn't slow down. It wasn't until the grass suddenly fell away at the edge of a small river he came to a halt. It was thin and no more than a few feet deep, flowing lazily through the grassland. Hoping it would further slow the Jaragia, Nox plunged in without hesitation. He kept Zyuk held above his head as the water quickly rose to his chest. It was cold, but the warm summer air made it bearable, at least compared to the icy river in the hollow. On the other side, he ran down the river's edge a ways, clambered up the bank into the tall grass, disappearing from view. There, he finally collapsed, his legs completely giving out. He put Zyuk down next to him, careful not to further damage his wounded leg. He tried to catch his breath. Nox tore at the fabric of his shirt, ripping a large section from it. With shaking fingers, he removed the thin-bladed knife from Zyuk's haunch and wrapped the cloth around it, pulling the knot tight. He knew it wasn't much, but he prayed it would be enough for the small creature to survive. He lost too much blood already. Just as he tied the final knot, another rattling cry rose up over the grass. Nox sank low to keep to the ground, lying on his belly to keep out of view. From his hiding place, he could see through the sharp blades of grass and down the small river valley. The Draugr had reached the edge of the river at last and seemed to be frantically searching for him. They stared at the water, looking up and down the valley for any sign of his passing. One of them tilted its head for a moment, the cracking blue eye suddenly going out. Its head snapped up, looking precisely in his direction. Jesus Christ, give up already! Oh, poor Nox. Nox whispered, remembering too late that they could sense the clavis. He looked down at the black fox covered in blood next to him. Neither he nor Zyuk could keep up with their current pace. Both of them were either injured or exhausted. The clanking of bones on the stone brought Nox's attention back to the river. The Draugr were standing a few feet away, directly across the river from him. Nothing separated them but the gentle flow of the river. Nox knew he'd have to face them again. He couldn't keep running, and Zyuk would die if he tried. In the moments between heartbeats, he tried to formulate some sort of plan, a way of disabling the creatures for good. But nothing came to him. Pushing himself to his feet, he let himself rise into view of the skeletons. They screamed out in reply, lunging in his direction. Pulling his spear from his back, he stepped forward, feet grinding into the smooth river stones on the bank as he prayed for a way to defeat them at once and for all. "Come and get me!" he muttered at the Draugr, his spear held ready. They didn't need further prompt. With another cry, they plunged into the river, their eyes crackling with anger. At first, it looked like the water wouldn't slow them down in the slightest, and Nox prepared himself to fight for his life. But as they reached waist level, something odd happened. The water around their bones began to bubble and churn, as if boiling. Inky blackness eroded away from their corpses. Nox didn't understand what was going on until they started to scream, their eyes flashing a brilliant red, as if it made of acid. The river slowly eroded their bones away, and they sank towards the surface. Both tried to claw their way out, but each time their hands hit the water, more bone was eaten away by the water, until their arms were nothing more than stumps of bone. As the sun set in the western sky, Nox watched as the last of the Draugr slipped below the surface, and their oily black ichor was washed away by the river. The skulls plunged into the bottom, coming up to rest on the polished river stones. For a brief moment, their red eyes stared up at him, through the undulating water, anger burning in their sockets. As he watched, they slowly faded away, their harsh light going out forever. In a few moments, nothing was left behind but a few scraps of armor and a pair of rusted swords sinking into the mud. Oh! Muddy! Oh, lordy. Now they were determined, but they can't escape rushing water, I guess. And they like vampires, cannot cross rushing water. I see. Oh, lordy, they're finally safe. Now we can attend to the fluffy boy. And all will be well. Next time. Chapter 17. Ah, gosh, I'm tired. That was very fun. I very much like this fox. We've had a lot of time with him, just chatting. And poor baby doesn't really know what's going on. Sweet fluffy little boy. Next time I will stream will actually be tomorrow, where I will play Alice Mare, a sort of RPG horror thingamajig, because I am not very good at spoopy. So I will play those kind of things. So I played Ib, and I played not Mad Father. What's a majigger? Corpse Party! That's the one. That's the ticket. I played Corpse Party, and that one actually effed me up a little bit, but Alice Mare hopefully won't. So I will play Alice Mare on the Mondays of this. Depending how long it is, and depending on how I do it, I might replace a couple of Final Fantasies with it, because Final Fantasy is currently in the grindy ass bit of Realm Reborn. We are quickly approaching the Titan warm-up, which is, as we know, the most thrilling part of the game. But anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. This has been Brandy Smith, live from the Forbidden Library. And I've enjoyed this book. I hope you've enjoyed this book. See you tomorrow. Goodbye. Oh wait, wait a second. I'm gonna come back for a minute, because I've realized that I forgot to change my slides to have my recent schedule on, because I'm just that organized, you know? I have everything organized before streams. Oh, come on, mouse. Why is my mouse like this? That's because it's a cheap mouse from B&M. That is why. Actually, no, that wasn't even the mouse's fault. I was clicking. I have tab groups on my Chrome, and I keep forgetting that you just can't close all the tab groups at once. You have to have at least one open, which is a bit annoying. Let's have that as a JPEG. Like, I sorted out my schedule. I didn't sort it out on stream. Told you, I am so organized. This is what you're here for, right? Stream stuff and me just, like, explaining my stream stuff. I'm tired, did you know? I'm looking forward to sleep today. Sleep is great. Some people say sleep is for the weak, but I am so very weak. So it is, in fact, my favorite thing in the world. And second... Nearly there. We're nearly there. Streaming stuff, schedules. October. Done. Just check that worked. Yay! Alright, here you go. Here is my bye-bye screen. Bye-bye!